Welcome to the CPO Rising podcast series brought to you by Products That Count, the world's largest nonprofit community, engaging over 500,000 product managers and chief product officers united by a mission to empower everyone to build products that truly count. In a world flooded with products, only a few ignite passion, deliver value at scale, and transform lives. Behind those exceptional products are visionary CPOs and high-performing product teams. We recognize these trailblazers through our coveted awards, accelerate careers from PM to the C-suite and beyond through daily best practices, and serve as the trusted advisor to nearly all Fortune 1000 CPOs. Our corporate alliance includes Walmart, Ford, Cisco, Johnson & Johnson, Amplitude, and more. The most admired product leaders across industries serve on our advisory council, guiding the future of product leadership. Together, we're shaping a future where every product counts. Learn more at productsthatcount.org. Produced in partnership with Capgemini and Mighty Capital, this series brings you exclusive conversations between our resident CPO, Renee Niemi, and the 2025 CPO Award winners. Get ready for raw insights, real strategies, and the secrets behind their success. Let's get into it.
So you've had a wealth of experience, Avery, in product management over the years. And so you really have a unique perspective on specifically how the role of leadership has changed. I would love for you to share with us, your insights and what you've seen morph over the last few years that you've
Yeah.
been leading product.
Yeah, it's funny. When I first started, we had just gone through our agile transformation, and I don't think, honestly, many people outside of the technology leadership even knew what that meant. So my role was new. I was new to the company. So I think the one thing that was helping me out was that I had credibility. And I will say, starting with credibility with your business partners does help. But I didn't, nobody knew what to do with me at the leadership level. I didn't have a natural seat from a strategy perspective. I was just out there hustling and getting work done. And I think the biggest thing that has changed is the value that the team brings and the necessity of having a technology-driven perspective at the strategy level has completely done a 180 over the years. So I went from, barely being able to get the ear of an executive around, what direction I think we should go, to us not doing anything without getting a perspective from me or my team. And that was a big shift. And I think one that honestly benefited the company because now we're blending business and technology in a way that is almost mandatory at this point. I mean, maybe when I started this 15 years ago, you could argue you could get away with it. You can't anymore. Your competition is technology led, especially as a retailer, we always have to look at the Amazons of the world, the Targets of the world, the Walmarts who are making massive investments in technology. And if you don't stay competitive, you fail. And so I think that's the biggest change ultimately is just having leadership understand the value of bringing someone that can balance and find the intersection of technology and business, and use that as a driver of strategy versus an afterthought. And I think clearly well, maybe not clearly, but what I have seen change over the years is largely that. And the runway from moving from a company like Gap and doing that over multiple years to coming into Foot Locker and being positioned that way to start with. I mean, what a mammoth change. I still have to earn the seat every day. Don't get me wrong. Like it's not, you never get a seat at the table just given to you. You have to earn it every day. But that the opportunity was afforded to me from the beginning, it wasn't something I had to go convince people of, I think is just a massive change from when I started this whole thing.
It's interesting as I listen to you speak to all of the change that's happened. It dawns on me that the pandemic had to have a pretty material
Mm.
impact on your role specifically at retail. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's the sort of short-term impacts, which was a complete pivot of strategy. I remember that we, have these amazing roadmaps and we're so proud of them. And then, suddenly our stores are closed. And a very specific example of this is we didn't have, pickup from store anywhere on our roadmap. Like this idea that you were going to park on a curb and we were going to bring products out to your car was nowhere to be found on a roadmap. And yet we had to deliver that within the first, I don't know, 6 weeks of the stores shutting down. We had to completely pivot our strategy to turn stores into distribution centers. We were doing all of our fulfillment to keep our labor employed and to continue to service the customers. Our, technology, great, I'm very grateful for, but was never meant to scale to suddenly being 100% of our business. We built things to service a certain percentage of our customers, and now suddenly it's servicing 100% of our customers. And so look, I think the biggest takeaway for me is not the specifics of what we had to do differently, but the inherent flexibility in our approach and how we were able to pivot our roadmaps completely to fit the new reality we were facing, honestly. And I'm really proud of that time. Like, don't get me wrong, it was hard, and we didn't know every day if like we're going to get our stores back open. But like the way the team pivoted and how tightly we partnered with our business, and really, like, you know, ultimately, my job is to make customers happy, whether they're internal customers or external customers, because there's a very simple equation. Happy customers earning more money. More money makes your shareholders happy. So it's a pretty simple equation to do my job, but in there is the nuance, and how do you understand what customers need when your entire reality has shifted? I think that was an important thing. Is you spent a lot of time with customers to understand what was their new reality so that we could shift ours accordingly.
Yeah. Were you able to take all of those learnings and apply them? Because what strikes me is when we're backed in the corner, we can just do miraculous things.
Yeah.
Now, you can't always keep the accelerator at full tilt because you burn people out. But were there lessons learned from a process point of view, from an acceleration point of view of how to do things quicker, faster, leaner?
I mean, yes, I will give I will give us credit though for having a pretty robust process to begin with. So,
Good.
we have all of the normal check-ins that we would need to support an evolving roadmap. I think what was different ultimately is the pace of delivery had to increase, and we actually had to remove some of our process. When you're chugging along in an everyday situation, waiting a month for the next steering committee meeting or whatever it might be works. But when you're trying to react to a completely different reality, you can't always wait for that. So, it actually, I would say the biggest thing is we just got more flexible in our interactions. Instead of waiting for steering committees, we had a lot more ad hoc conversations. And I won't lie, as much as a pain that the pandemic was, it was actually one of the most fun times for the team because we were at our scrappiest. Nobody had time for the politics. Nobody had time for uh, the debates. It was all about the action. And I think that the lessons coming out of that is how fast we could move when you dropped away all of the other stuff that wasn't important. Now, I'd be lying to say that we completely stuck to that as we move forward. Obviously, the process over time started to come back in, and the individual needs started to creep in. Prioritization got harder, but there was a time period there where it was really fast to get things done. And I
Streamline.
think we also were more accepting of good being good enough. This notion that everything has to be perfect, and if it's not, we're going to bring you in front of a tribunal and have a conversation about why it wasn't perfect. That sort of went out the door. Nobody was perfect in that period of time. And when no one's perfect, I think everyone's a little more accepting of the imperfections that come along with software delivery.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for going on that tangent with me.
Of course,
I think
it was an
it's
interesting time.
yeah, it's super instructive too as a leader and how you navigate that. I'm a big believer that company culture is fundamental to product success. They're really,
Yep.
really tightly linked. I'm also a big believer, just to show my cards, that good product leadership turns into good business results.
Yep.
So I would love a conversation and around culture, and there's no right or wrong answer, but it's less about culture and more about decision making, process and planning and how the company comes together. And if I were to preload you with 3 potential options. Feel free to add more if you need to. Of, some companies are very, sales driven.
Yep.
Some companies are very finance driven. And then some companies can be, product centered.
Yep.
Like where describe your culture and how that impacts product A and B decision making processes and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sort of ties back to the question you asked me earlier about being in retail. You know, we are very much sales driven. We sell products. It's what we do. And so I think that drives a lot of how we think about the technology we deliver. That being said, I'm a big proponent of really anchoring against one, the company's sort of goals. So, at Foot Locker, we have publicly talked about our strategic plan, which we call the Lace Up Plan. And there are pillars within that we want to make sure that all the way down to our product teams, that we're tying the essence of those strategies through and through. I think the important thing of this is as you develop those, OKRs and you're creating sort of your value equation as you think about the products you're developing on an annual basis or the long-term roadmap, is that there is room for things that don't directly drive sales. And it's maybe an odd place for a product manager to go. But I try to find the balance between things like tech debt, good architecture that evolves over time, how we think about, splitting our time between things we know we need to do and innovation. But I think it's really important. So although we're sales driven, I always have a story I like. Well, it's not a story, but an anecdote I like to tell my team. It's like, we do things that sound sort of technical, right? So we do things like database upgrades. And I try to explain to my team and the technical team that no engineer's ever woken up in the morning and be like, you know what I feel like doing this morning? I'm going to upgrade our databases. No, we do it for a reason. We do it because either there's risk associated with running software that's out of date, or we do it because there's performance gains. But if we can just articulate why we're doing these things, then it makes it really easy for me to interweave priorities between driving sales directly and ensuring that we have the platforms and technology we need to continue to deliver sales. When you think about companies that have these large outages and all of these issues, I think it's because people don't find the way to interlace the things you need to do to stay current with the things that directly drive sales. And part of my role is to explain to our business leaders who maybe are not technology savvy, nor is it their role to be, by the way, why spending money and time on these things is so important in order to consistently drive sales. And so, yes, we're sales driven, but I try very hard to turn that into a holistic view of driving technology versus just turning into a feature factory where all we're doing is, taking the next shiny object and throwing it, on the site, in the stores, whatever it might be. And so that's the balancing act, because we are so sales driven, is how do you take that and turn it into something that supports the longevity of the technology we're delivering, as well as delivering the sales results, which I think is it can be a balancing act for sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. Doesn't surprise me that you're sales driven. Makes a ton of sense.
The
It also
shareholders really like those sales. Shocking,
revenue
right?
revenue is everything, right? But sometimes it can present challenges for product teams, and it sounds like you've found a way to really, balance,
Yeah.
the needs of the business with keeping your innovation lane open
I
and
mean, look, nobody's perfect at it. Anyone who tells you they're doing it perfectly is probably not telling the truth. But that being said, I do think we have a pretty mature practice around it that leads to, generally speaking, good results.
I like that. Excellent. Let's shift gears a bit. We talked earlier about, your observations on the evolution of product leadership. I think it's safe to say that the role of product management has also changed quite a bit, especially in the last year or two, uh, with the introduction of AI and all of these amazing tools to make us smarter, more efficient. But every industry is slightly different, and I would just love your lens and your definition of what it means to be in product management in 2025.
Well, just one question about the AI. Are you thinking in terms of how we develop our products, or are you thinking specifically how we do our job, or both?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. It's interesting. One of my friends is a professor at MIT Sloan, and he was kind enough to come do a talk on GPTs for my team and all of the technology team. And it was fascinating to get someone who is so technically minded around this stuff, but yet at his heart a teacher, to expose them to how this new technology actually works and to simplify it down to something that is more digestible. And part of the reason I did that is because, to your point, both from how we do our jobs as product managers, but also how we think about delivering technology in partnership with enterprise architecture and our engineering teams, it is, you can't do it anymore without thinking about how AI plays a role. Now, I will pause here. I did at one point in my career have a board member come up to me and ask something to the effect of, what are we doing about blockchain? This was a couple years back when blockchain was all the rage. And my answer was nothing. And they looked at me kind of curiously, because that's not something you respond to a board member with. But my point was, blockchain is a tool in the toolkit. And I don't want to get too enamored with the technology itself. Like, we have to stay customer focused and outcome focused. That being said, AI opens up a whole new world of potentials for us that if we're not aware of that world of potentials, we will miss out on bringing the best possible solutions to bear, both for the customer and how we work. So it's been an interesting thing. So I'll just talk internally for a quick second. It has made doing our basic jobs so much easier. You know, AI will never get to 100% answer. Like, if you're trying to just, much like if you're in school and you decide to turn a paper and it's 100% AI driven, I wish you the best of luck, and you're not going to get very far. But as you're thinking about how to start something, it can be an amazing thought starter to help get the juices flowing. But the magic is taking your specific context and layering it into a framework that you can more easily get to. So I look at it as an accelerator, quite frankly, within how I do my job. I don't look at it as cheating. I don't look at it as wrong. If someone can give me a head start, why not take advantage of it?
Yeah.
So I love it in that regard. Couldn't tell you how many times I've pasted in a chat GPT answer to someone just to get them thinking about something in a structured way. So I do think it's changing how I think about my job. It's changing how my team does their job. But again, at least not for not for some time, is a substitute for bringing your context, your customer needs, and making sure that you're really thinking through how a more generalized framework could be leveraged and then contextualized for what you're trying to solve. And then in terms of how we think about it from like delivering products, it changes completely what we can solve and how we can solve it. And again, I don't want my product team overly focused on the technology itself, but I do want them very aware of what's possible. And that's part of the reason I brought my friend in to talk about AI, is because I need my team to understand the art of the possible around what it enables. What I really don't want, though, is them coming to the table with, I want to do AI. My answer back would be very simply, well, what customer problem are you trying to solve? What value are you trying to drive? And then let's talk about it. I always tell this story to people because I'm trying to explain what I do to people that really don't have a lot of exposure. And I always say, if you go into the doctor's office and you say, doctor, please amputate my arm. No doctor is just going to remove your arm. They're going to ask you a series of questions. They're going to ask you, what's bothering you, diagnostic questions, and then maybe you walk out with a wrist brace. Well, that's the role I play. And so, if you come to me and just say, I want to do AI, well, that's a bit like saying I want to amputate my arm. And I'm going to ask you a lot of questions to understand what you're actually trying to solve. And yes, maybe AI is the right tool, maybe not, but at least we'll focus back on the business value we're trying to drive ultimately for the customer.
Yeah, I love that analogy. I may borrow it at some point.
Feel free.
It's really
I
good.
don't take licensing fees, so knock yourself out.
If you know. Uh, just kidding. But I love the point that you made around, it's not about the tech, it's about the problem solving. I used to tell, always everybody's got those product managers that just want to get into the weeds on the tech. And it's like, listen, that's what engineers are for. That's what the CTO office is for. Your job is to understand, the why,
Yep.
and what outcome are you trying to drive, and
100%.
what's the strategy? So I really like your answer on that. As you were talking about the AI prompts, I thought of a fun question, and I'm going to ask you this question, but I'm going to tell you my answer to it first, and you can think of
We're
one.
gonna just say yes then at the end.
So my question: what is the coolest thing that you've ever used AI to help you do? So that's the question. I'm going to kind of give you my answer because, and I don't know if it's the coolest, but it was something where I had a pretty big aha moment where I find that I was, I'm a hypothesis person, right? Like I get anecdotes of data, and then I said I now have a hypothesis. And so what I will do is I'll take a hypothesis and I'll throw it in Chat GPT, and I'll ask them, is there any evidence to
Mhm.
support this hypothesis? Or is there any, are there any papers? So let me give
Yep.
you an example. Like I had a hypothesis that, I'm going to use the super obvious one, but let's say I had a hypothesis that there were more, um, men that were CPOs than there are women that are CPOs, but the rate at which CPO women are taking on the role is accelerating. Okay, so that, let's just say that was a hypothesis, which by the way is truly a hypothesis, with a ton of anecdotes that I have at the moment. Um, you just go into I go into every data, Perplexity, ChatGPT, Google, Microsoft, whoever will talk to me, and I throw it in there. And what's great is it goes and it finds all that. It gives me the
Yep.
sources. And then it allows me to determine, yes, it's true. No, it's not true, or not yet. Ask again later, kind of thing. So, and as a product leader and a product manager, like we're always dealing with, kind of broader trends and hypothesis. And I just think it's super cool that you can
Yeah.
really get to a short circuit that way. What's
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I look, I use it in similar ways. I, use it to understand what new technologies are out there. Ask it questions like what are you seeing more commonly from a technology perspective. But I actually think the most interesting use was not quite for something organizational. It was more for something we are trying to do and deliver some intelligence around. Um, we decided, well, we had a hypothesis, as you put it, that we weren't very good at describing our products in a customer language. If you've ever worked at a retailer, particularly apparel retailer, we have these taxonomies that describe our products. And I'll give you an example. So one of our taxonomy nodes is gap was woven items. And I can't imagine a customer has ever walked into a store and said, "Please show me your woven items department." Just, I can't imagine that being a thing. And yet we would use that taxonomy for things like forecasting, for all sorts of things that were more customer centric. And so probably the coolest thing I ever did was we started feeding our images into ChatGPT and asking ChatGPT to describe the product. And it was fascinating to see what came back. And we actually tested those attributes for, again, some of our forecasting models to understand if they were more predictive of demand than the traditional merchandise taxonomy, and significantly more accurate. Without going into too much of it, it was amazing how ChatGPT could just look at an image of a product and give you a customer set of descriptions that you could then use all over the place. And so anyway, long story short, I think that was probably the coolest thing, was fundamentally understanding, can ChatGPT describe a product to us in a customer language?
Yeah,
And it was super interesting to see the result.
amazing. A very cool story. Thank you for sharing that. Innovation, innovation, innovation. That's such an overused term, but we are responsible as product leaders, to innovate. And every industry has a different definition. Every industry invests, a different percentage of their available resources to innovate. What do you think when you think about innovation, I'm talking kind of like frameworks,
Yep.
processes, and like, but how do you make sure that you're investing properly, especially given that you're in a sales led organization?
Yep. Well, I think first is to understand, sort of where you believe you as a company belong on an innovation curve. There are some companies with massive, massive amounts of dollars spent on technology. A Google, for example, I would expect them to be extremely high on the innovation curve. A Foot Locker, less so. Not to say we wouldn't innovate, but first thing is shouldn't have 100% of our efforts towards innovation projects. That probably would not serve us very well. And so first off is to understand, from a framework perspective, what percentage of your investment do you want to be around innovation? Secondly, is making sure that you're defining where you're innovating. I always find innovation looking for a problem is the wrong way. You really want to think about customer problems that you can use innovation to solve in unique ways that give you a distinct advantage from a customer perspective. So again, start with just where do you believe you should be on an investment curve, then make sure you're anchored on actual valuable customer problems that take innovative solutions. And then the big thing is you don't want to overinvest in the innovation. One of the principles of agile is fail fast. Well, agile or innovation is one of those areas where you really do need to stick to that. And so we have this sort of uh, process, if you'll call it, where we start with the smallest possible test just to get a sense. One, does the technology even work? I don't need to go to 100 stores with something to find out the technology doesn't even work. And so, what is the smallest slice of that where we can prove out the tech? Then once we prove out the tech, you got to prove out the customer value. And so you think about your next sort of concentric circle of test. And each step of the way, you just make sure you have a learning agenda in place, that you understand what you're trying to measure, what you're trying to learn. And as long as you're thoughtful about that, you sort of treat it as a startup. I always tell my leadership, I don't want $10 million for an innovation project. I want, a couple dollars. And then I want to come back to you, tell you what I've learned, and ask you for that next tranche of investment. And I think as long as you structure it that way, you don't run what I think is oftentimes the problem with innovation is you end up chasing it forever. And it's hard to know when to stop. And I see a lot of projects that go too far. And with this process of these concentric circles of investment, you really do hold yourself accountable to meeting the expectations of each. Because the problem you can run into is convincing yourself that it's worth chasing endlessly. And I think that, the hardest thing a product manager ever does is stop something. I think the easiest thing we do is start something. Stopping things is really, really hard because it feels like failure. But I
Yeah.
think that, for me, we spend a lot of, we do brown bags or lunch and learns where we talk about what we learned from our failures. And part of the reason for doing that is to let people know what we learned out of what didn't work. So maybe it can influence someone else as they move forward. But I think that's the main thing is, make sure that you are thoughtful about how much investment you're making in your innovation. Make sure it's focused on a real valuable customer problem, and then set it up as a series of investments that each have their own stage gates to move on to the next step. And if you do that, it's pretty easy. Now the hard part is then figuring out, what are you going to innovate? I mean, the magic of product management, right, is identifying the bits and pieces that you want to pull together. I used to make my team watch I can't find it on YouTube anymore, but there was a video called "Everything Is a Remix," and the point of it is I was trying to make the point, like, you guys are not likely going to invent something new. What you're more likely to do is to stitch together in a super interesting way a bunch of things people have done before to create unique value creating solutions. I think that's sort of one of the things I really try and teach is that innovation should not be about inventing something no one's seen before. You're just, especially, at a company like Foot Locker, that's not our purpose. We're not here to, I'm not an Apple where I'm trying to create that next product no one's ever seen. And I think that the value is in how we create innovative solutions using innovative technologies, using innovative approaches, but ultimately stitch them together in a new way that the customer hasn't seen before that creates value and excitement.
You know, I really love the perspective that you have on this because you're spot on. Innovation is not the same industry to industry, and the advice that you
The
clearly
structure can work for anyone. It doesn't really matter where you sit.
Right. But how you invest, what you invest, and
Yep.
I love that little stitch together the best things that you've seen other people do may in fact be incredibly
Yes.
unique and innovative for your industry, right? So
Some of our favorite products that we think of as innovative were honestly just stitched together technologies in a way that we've never seen before. I mean, most of the components of that original iPhone were not original to the iPhone, but they were the first to put it together in that way and change the entire landscape of how we think about phones.
yeah, yeah, 100%, 100%. And one further thought on this, I often love, in my role to be able to put product leaders from different industries together and kind of building on this idea is like I see them pull the best from each other
Yeah.
because they're taking a look at it from a different lens through a different industry. They may have a different process, a different way of working, but it's like, why didn't we think of that? And they'll bring it on board and it becomes a really unique, innovative game changer for them. So it's just really
Well, and I
interesting.
think that, one of the interesting, I love you brought that up because, as I think about team hiring strategies, that's one of the things I think about is I don't want a homogenous team of only retailers. To really get the best out of your team, you do need a mix of perspectives. So I have people that came out of the business like I did. I have people that came from pure play ecom, where, the product manager is the final word on strategy. I have people from finance. I have people from hospitality. And I think that is so valuable to get that mix of perspectives as you're thinking about strategically building a team. Because don't forget, as a leader, you're not just building products, you're building teams.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that. It was actually one of my questions. So add a way to get in front of it, just to do a slightly deeper dive on that. The complementary skill sets for sure, some with domain expertise, some with other expertise. What about how do I say that? Do you look at any other lens when you're putting together that team structure?
Yeah. Let me start with the most important thing for me. And you actually brought it up earlier in sort of a different context, but I'll go back to it for a sec. So culture is number one for me. Like I
Mm.
am so protective of my team culture. I have seen time and time again where a single bad seed can rot from the inside a team. And so like I would rather hire, someone who is green, but we think has the right ingredients, the curiosity, the never give up that it requires to be a great product manager, but not a lot of experience over someone who has a ton of experience, but is not a cultural fit. And I think so that's ground zero for me is culture, without a doubt. And one of the things that I'm most proud about is we have a text chain for all of my team members who have gone on to lead product at other companies. And like when we get to add someone new to that, it's like the proudest thing for me is that the culture that I've built is now extending out to other places. And that's just an amazing thing. So number one, culture. Number two is I do think about the mix of domain expertise versus product expertise. You don't want a team full of people who know the business and don't know technology, but you also don't want a team full of technologists that don't understand the business. And so really trying to find a healthy mix of that is important to me. Industry mix is important to me. And then you brought it up. One of the things that's super important to me also to think about is, things like gender mix. One of the things I was most proud of at my last stop is that I had a team that was 50-50 women and men. And that in technology is very rare. And it was something, I was the executive sponsor for the Women in Technology. I have a daughter who I believe can do anything she wants, and to be able to be a leader and really, hold myself accountable to the future that I want my daughter to have, man, that was a powerful thing to be able to do. And so, I would think about all of those things, but at the end of the day, like past culture, I hire for potential. I have found over and over again that you don't want to let potential go by. And even if it's not an exact fit for the role or you need to find a different role, I get greedy. I get greedy with talent. I get greedy with potential. And it does mean that I have a lot of people leave. Like that text chain that I was talking about has a number of people on it because I hire great people, and that's okay. Every team needs a mix of steady eddies and overachievers. And, I always am thinking about who's going to be my replacement someday. But not everyone on the team can be. So it makes me so proud when they go to lead somewhere else.
I really, really love that framework. I don't know any other way to call it. I want to talk a little bit about that diversity equation. I heard something today actually that I had never heard before, and it kind of puts a nice little umbrella on it. It's called the Conway Principle. Have you heard of the Conway Principle
I have
before?
not.
I had never heard of it either, but and I'm sure I will get this wrong, or not 100% right, but the idea is the way you structure your team will immediately be reflected in your product delivery.
I completely agree with that.
And
100%.
and so, if you want your product to be equally consumed by men, by women, by different races, then you have to have a team that understands that and can see that and help guide that. So,
100%. And I work in an industry that is heavily, heavily female driven from a
yeah,
retail perspective.
yeah.
At Gap, the customer was her, she. The customer wasn't a non-gendered customer because we understood who the customer was. And you're 100% right that reflecting. God, I love that you brought that up because we are a reflection of the products we create, which needs to be a reflection of the customer. And I love that, two-way mirror that we have to think about as we build a team, and you have to be thoughtful about it for sure.
Yeah, really, really cool. Uh, you know, this has gone so fast. I'm looking at the time, and unfortunately, we're gonna have to move to our rapid round. But before I do that, I hope that we can continue the conversation. I think you have really, really unique perspectives, and it's been a lot of fun. But we're not done yet, so
Okay,
don't sign off.
I'm still here, I promise.
These are our, we're now moving to our rapid question, rapid answer round. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right. So, what makes a great product leader?
Someone who understands the customer and the value that the customer is trying to drive through your products. I mean, at the end of the day, to keep it very short, focus on the customer. We all say it, we don't all do it. And every day you got to wake up and refocus on that customer because the customer is evolving, and so have to you if you're going to stay on top of it.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. What's your favorite tool and why?
Um, I mean, look, if I wanted to be murdered by everyone, I'd say PowerPoint, but I will go with actually Miro. I will go with Miro. The cloud, especially in the world of like us being scattered across the world, the collaboration tools are so important. And, especially at my level where we're spending more time in the strategy, like I don't get into Jira anymore. I loved it when I was earlier in my career, but at this point, the collaboration that we get out of Miro is just amazing. It brings us together in a way that would be hard without it.
Nice. By the way, I did have another chief product officer say PowerPoint was their favorite tool. I almost fell
I
off.
can't escape it. As much as I know everyone dislikes it, the reality is my presentations live in PowerPoint. And so, it's the necessary evil of the gig.
Yes, yes, I hear you. Okay, what are you reading right now?
It's interesting. I have two children who occupy most of my time. And so my reading is somewhat scattered. I actually spend most of my time, honestly, reading, listening to more podcasts than reading these days. I
Mhm.
just, the eyes get real tired when the kids get to bed. So
I
there's some people like there's a guy Ken Pilot who was actually a GM at Gap actually before I got there. I love it, and the reason I love it is it's really about the business of retail, and I think that for me it's trying to find the mix again of product management skill sets, but the academic product management skill sets don't serve me much value.
oh,
It's mixing them with the business side. And so for me, I find things like that, what Ken does, so amazing, where he's trying to talk about the business problems, but at the same time bringing together how we solve them through technology.
So
I will get back to books eventually, but my goodness, my
I
children.
understand. I took about a 20-year hiatus on books too.
Yep, I'm there.
Although listening to books is a really interesting option, just for future reference, if you have the mind space, honestly. My next question was, who do you follow and why? But it sounds like you've already answered that.
Yeah, I mean, I follow a lot of people. So I love to be close to retail technology. Like it's just I love retail technology. I'm lucky enough that I do a couple advisory roles. I staying close to founders and understanding what they're spending time on, staying close to the investment community, understanding what they're investing in. Like that's what I love to do. And that's the people I tend to spend the most time talking to and listening to.
I love it. Avery, such a fun use of my afternoon. I want to thank you so much for your time, your insights, your generosity, and most of all, your passion is so clear that you love what you do.
I do love what I do. I was lucky to find this as a career. I'm sure there's lots of people that would be great product managers that never know it's a possibility, but I was lucky enough to find it.
Well, congratulations on being a finalist, and we'll definitely
Thank
be in
you.
touch
I
soon.
appreciate the time with you for sure.
This is SC Moadi again, founder and chair of Products That Count. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you like what you heard, be sure to leave us a review on your favorite platform, including Spotify and Apple. And please check out our other resources at productsthatcount.org. They're designed to accelerate your product career and make product the most important function in business. Until soon.